That's our new logo for the museum, and our new name for the museum, if you haven't noticed a change in the name. I'll get the commercial in right off the get-go here. Um, Antique Wireless Association is the parent company. It's the educational corporation and holds the charter for the museum. It's the sole sponsor of the museum. And in case you didn't know, we have 1,500 members in all 50 states and 16 countries. Um, The Communications Technology Museum is in 4 buildings on 5 acres on our campus. And if you haven't been there, I suggest you might want to come and visit us. It's plan on spending some time there. It's 10,000 square feet in the exhibit area. So on with the show, Voice of America, the voice of freedom. Um, and the concept of of freedom is a really important one. And when we have kids there, I always make the point that freedom's not free. And they look at me like I'm crazy. But it's important to understand and to tell these kids that freedom is not free. It's earned by the lives of men and women who, through the years, have uh, sacrificed to give us the freedom that we enjoy today. And that's an important message, and one that I like to make when we've got visitors, young kids, to the museum. So what I want to do is talk about the history of Voice of America briefly, and then what we did to get the exhibits that we have from Voice of America in. Voice of America was created in 1942. It really didn't go on the air until with its own broadcasting until later, but it was to counter the Nazi and Japanese propaganda broadcast. Also to make sure that the troops had the news and what was going on. It was very important that the U.S. troops, when they were overseas, heard something besides the propaganda that was coming from the Nazis and the Japanese, and uh, and provide them some entertainment important for their morale. Um, right off the get-go in 1942, at the first broadcast, they made the statement actually in German. The news may be good or bad. We shall tell you the truth, and that's the byword that they've gone through for all these years. Now, initially, uh, truth was we were getting our butt kicked. So they had a lot of people said, "Well, I'm going to listen to them. If that's what they want to do, and they're willing to tell us the truth, I'm going to listen to that." Initially, they used the BBC transmitters in Europe because the United States really didn't have shortwave transmitters. They had a few. Um, General Electric had ones in Brentwood and Schenectady, New York. Um, so in 1944, at the height of the war, they built 3 transmitter stations. One in Bethany, Ohio, near Dayton. If you've been to Dayton, that building now houses the Voice of America Museum. Also, Dixon, California, which is near San Francisco. Uh, the Bethany closed in 94. Dixon closed in 83. And the one that's near and dear to our heart was in Delano, which is about 130 miles north of Los Angeles. And it closed in 2007. Here's a picture of the Bethany, Ohio one. I just want to make an observation here. You can see the antennas in the left side over the top of the building, and that big tower in the middle, and you'll see that in all 3 of the stations, was for security. Uh, this was the height of the war. They were concerned about the stations being taken over and used for propaganda. Now, Bethany, Ohio was built by Crosley. Dixon, California was built by NBC. Their tower is slightly different than Bethany. And here's Delano. Now, if I hadn't put the label on there, Delano and uh, Bethany are exactly the same building. Uh, Delano was built in 1944 by CBS. Now, the purpose was to serve the Pacific Rim and the Central and South America market. Uh, you say, well, wait a minute here. Those 2 markets, well, one's on the front of the antenna and one's on the back of the antenna. Construction began in April of 1944 and they went on in November of 44. Now, if you think about what had to go on to construct those stations, at the height of the war, you can see the commitment that the United States made towards Voice of America. Initially, they had two 50 kilowatt transmitters, and in 1945, they added a 200,000 watt federal. That the station is the Jack Popley station. Jack was very much into WOR and initial radio, and then when television came along, when FM came along, Jack was right in the thrust of all of that. The studios were in New York. In other words, these were relay stations. They were not creating programming of their own. They were relay stations for programming that was sent to them from New York. Eventually, the New York offices were closed, and the studios were relocated to Washington, D.C. The reason they were relay stations, and you have to, if you look at the fundamental of the station and the display that we have in ours, they were concerned about someone getting into the station and initiating propagandized broadcasts. So nothing was initiated in the stations themselves. It all came from Washington or New York City. It's a little silly concept because the audio board, which is located in the display, is totally open. You could plug anything you wanted into that audio board, but they were trying to be good about it anyway. The news had to be accurate. It had to be non-propagandized, and we'll come back to that concept in a few minutes. They decided they were going to provide the facts, and they were going to let the listener understand the sound of freedom. The sound of freedom for Voice of America, in many respects, was our music and our culture. After the war, the idea of supporting the information for the troops wasn't necessary. And so they wanted to, Congress passed a legislation to promote the better understanding of the United States and other countries. Now, if you talk to anybody who's immigrated to the United States, to a person, you'll find out that they listen to Voice of America, and sometimes at a risk of being put in jail for doing that. By promotion of our understanding of the United States and our culture, included our language, English, and the freedom of our news and our music. Willis Conover, American jazz. Now, if you think about American jazz, it's unique in the world. It's unique because all you get is a type signature and a key signature, and you're on your own from there. Interesting enough, that were those of us that live near the museum, Willis Conover came from Kenmore, New York, which and he was graduated from Kenmore High School as I did. So I just found that out not too long ago. But he was famous for his American jazz. Now, again, sometimes Congress gets their ideas kind of kitty corner. By law, their Voice of America is prohibited from broadcasting U.S. citizens. Well, hey guys, when you got transmitters the size of Voice of America, we can hear them, but the broadcasts themselves, by law, is not to be set up to be broadcast to us. Now, the last statement is a statement that's now really in front of us since they've shuttered in the Voice of America, because Congress has been fighting this little concept for a long time. By law, it's prohibited from broadcasting a U.S. citizen. So a congressman has a very simple question. What's in it for me? What's in it for my constituents? Why are we spending money on it? Well, I think the argument has been that they're spending money on it to let people know what's going on in freedom and what's going on in the United States. But it's a lot of money. Right now, the current budget is $289 million a year. At its peak, they broadcast in 55 languages. Now, they're down to more or less 40. They're out of business at the moment, but when they were in, they were down to about 40, including a special English. Now, English is a special language and it's clearly the largest language in the world. It's 800,000 words. Um, French is like 45,000. Chinese is about 40,000. So it's a very large language. That makes it kind of hard to learn. And special English is a very simple concept. You can only have one thought in the sentence, and you was read to you at this rate, so you had the chance to learn English, special English. At their peak, they used 100 transmitters worldwide. That's to make sure that their signal got through the jamming and all the other things that were going on. But as the web and satellites have developed, shortwave broadcasting has certainly declined. And if you get on your receiver and start looking for broadcasting, it's really significantly declined because there are other avenues which are taking over and are much less expensive to operate than shortwave. Now, I know this is an eye chart, but we'll go with the colors. This is the map of the world in 2002. It hasn't changed a ton since then. The blue is where the press is free. By that, I mean the government does not tell the press what to broadcast or what to print. The yellow and the orange are where the government does um, tell them what to do, or they do it themselves. And so Voice of Freedom was to overcome that from the transmitters that were located around the world. Voice of America was going to tell the world, including those that are in the yellow and the orange, what is actually going on. In other words, the facts, nothing but the facts. That was their goal for a very, 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 very long time, right to the end. Now, here's an idea of where some of those are. A lot of them have been turned off, and a lot of them have been turned over to the countries that have those transmitters in them. So let's talk about the latest station. The latest station is the only one that's left on. It was built in 1962 on 6,000 acres. It's got a whole series of very large transmitters, and some of those transmitters since then have been upgraded to very, very high power. And they have reduced the number of transmitters and the number of antennas that are at the Greenville site, but they are still on the air, or they were until just recently. And there are several sites, and some of the sites have been turned over and gotten rid of. There's a list of the transmitters that had been upgraded last time that was done. You can see they have a lot of antennas, and each one of these sites had an amazing amount of antennas, and we'll be talking about those in a minute. So in 2014, while we were negotiating or trying to get some of the equipment that we finally did get, Voice of America went to a smaller office in Washington. And again, in infinite wisdom of the government, the staff was told to throw out all the files and all the historical museums before the move. In other words, they didn't want to preserve their history. And a lady there, Vicki Brimmer of the staff, dumpster dived and saved a large portion of the historical materials. And she sent them to AWA because we offered to preserve them in our media center. And so we wound up with, I think, 3 pallets load of documents and all sorts of things like that. And we preserved those in the AWA Media Center. Let's talk about the Delano station specifically. Built in 1944, as I said, it's on 800 acres. It was initially built with two transmitters, and ultimately in 1965, they put 3 Collins 821A1 250 kW transmitters online. That's the piece that really triggered our interest in preserving those processes was the Collins 821. Collins made those things, and we'll talk about those specific transmitters. They made three for each one of the initial um, stations. So they only made nine of those transmitters. And later, those were upgraded to the Brown Boveri 250Ks, but they were still in sight at the Delano station. Initially, they had a group of rhombics, uh, 95 to 160 feet tall, and they finally installed curtain arrays. Now, if you're not familiar with a curtain array, it just really is basically a big toaster hanging on a set of towers. Eventually, there were 27 antennas at the site, serving nine different transmitters. Now, again, this is an eye chart. Down at the bottom, where all the lines see to go, that's where the station was. And the rest of it was 800 makers of various kinds of rhombics and curtain arrays and all sorts of things to serve those transmitters. They're all down now, is my understanding. All the towers have been taken down. So this is what a curtain array looks like. Initially, uh, they were hung on big pipes, and to an extent, they're tunable, which is where they can actually change the angle of radiation almost 30 degrees. Here's the early ones. There's the towers holding up. You can't see the pieces in between unless you really look very, very closely. But there's a grid of wire looking like not a whole lot different than a toaster. Those were ultimately upgraded to this kind of a thing, and those are 392 feet tall. When the group that I'm going to be talking about went off to take the pieces that we wanted to, when we were given by the GSA, the guys had with them a transceiver, and they asked whether or not they could hook their transceiver up to the curtain array and use it on the amateur bands. The guy that was there at the station said, no, I don't think so. So it ceased operation in 2007. In 2013, it was decided to scrap the station. And that began a conversation between the Collins Collectors Association and AWA about seeing if we could rescue one of the 821A Collins transmitters. Since AWA was the only partner in this process that had a museum itself, we were the ones that sent a letter to Voice of America requesting the transmitter and the control room. But before the Voice of America could do that, under the rules of the federal government and state governments do the same thing. The General Services Administration, GSA, is the one that actually handles any scrapping of a station or any scrapping of materials. And we'll come back to that's kind of significant to the way this had to operate. So the Voice of America we had to apply to the New York GSA because the federal GSA can only give it to the New York GSA if they decide that it wants to go to us. And then the state GSA gives it to us. Well, almost. They give it to us, but they charge about 4% on the original cost of the station. Okay, that got a little on the spicy side, and I found negotiated them down, but it would still cost you $2,000 or $3,000 in fees just to have it transferred on paper from the federal to the state to us. The federal had to post this and offer the station to any federal or state agency. Well, turns out that no one wanted it, which is not exactly a complete shock, but no one wanted, and we were assigned the requested components. In May of 2014, we received a good news, bad news letter. The good news is we got what we asked for. The bad news, we had 2 weeks to pick it up. And in addition to that, under the GS rule, we had to use it within 12 months, which for us meant we had to display it within 12 months. Oh boy. Now, right in the middle of this thing, you'll see we have the authorization to obtain the property, which must be underlined, must be picked up within 2 weeks. Oh, yeah, swell. Now, hmm, this thing is in California. We're in Bloomfield, New York. The total weight of the of what we asked for was about 45,000 pounds. And it's all hooked up. And for the most part, had power on it. Even though they weren't using it, it still was sitting there, and we had 2 weeks to pick it up. Well, a group of AWA members, CCA members, uh, went out there and took it apart. We also had to get the money to pay for all this process, which we did. Oop. And here's the team of guys. Uh, Jack Knight was our AWA representative, and a lot of these other guys were AWAs, but these guys went out there and worked like demons and got it all packaged up, put on pallets, some 13 pallets weighing 38,000 pounds, and got ready to ship it on a 53 footer and a 26-foot trucks. Now, that wasn't as simple as you might expect. The station still had power on it, in a sense, in some of the circuits. They threw all the breakers that they could find to break it off. And Joe was on the top of a ladder and chomped into a live 400-volt line and welded his Klein shut. They scored his dive off the ladder at a 6.9. Here's the station control room as we found it. Now, this is multi-generational, so you have to understand that. And they were it had been sitting there now for 6 years. They had no incentive to make it look nice or keep it clean or whatever. They had a guy there um, there was a person on site 24/7 to make sure no one used the equipment. Really? Okay. Government at work again. But this is how we found it. Here are in order the three 821As. This is 6, 7, and 8's back here. And we got 8 because it was closest to the door. There it is, all packaged up on pallets, ready to get on the 53-foot truck and be shipped to Bloomfield, New York. Now, one of the things they found while they were dealing with the process is this dedication plaque to Jack Popley. And they gave me a call and said, well, we found the dedication plaque. It's dedicated to Jack Poppy. And I said, can you spell that for me, please? And they spelled it Popplele. And the hairs went up on the back of my neck, which is not much of a trip for my hair. And Jack Popley was indeed named on that. June Popley and his son-in-law, Jack Andrews, are were members of the AWA. They're selling keys now. So it seemed to me that the station was coming to a good spot and coming home to AWA. So here are the pallets out in the parking lot of Building 4. They got unloaded from the truck. The hardest one was the modulation or the modulation transformer, which is some 4,500 pounds. And that forklift was grunting pretty heavily to pick that sucker up. Here it is, all stuffed in the back of 4, and stuffed is a good word for it. There's no rhyme or reason to these pallets. They basically put stuff together what that would fit physically on the particular pallets, with no sense of what's in it and what's has to be done. The main feed to the pop is a 4160 volt feed at 495 kVA. That's why one of the reasons it didn't survive, because running it required a 7x24 crew of 5 people and a lot of electric power. So it sat there for a little while, not too long, because guess what? We have to put it on display within 12 months of receipt. So we refer to it variously as the Heathkit from hell, or some other words which are probably not usable in polite company. The worst thing that can happen to anybody in the world is try to put something back together that you never took apart in the first place. So our contractor, Casantha, was generous to give us a flatbed truck and a forklift and to move the stuff across the street from Building 4 over to the museum building. Now, if you look at this one, you see that there's a guy up on there with the pallet. And that's one of the main control sections of the A21A. And the reason he's up there is because when the forklift picked it up, it was creaking back and forth, rocking back and forth on the tines of the forklift. So he jumped up there and put some weight in the back to make sure it stayed on the forklift. God bless him. It's not something I would want to do. And it was cold that day. It was really, really, really cold that day. So there's a piece of the control room coming in and coming in the door. All right. So now we got all this shrink wrap stuff in the back of the museum. And at that point, if you remember the museum, it was only half the size that it is today. This was in the back. And in addition to that, there was a huge amount of stuff that was stored in the back of it as well. Not only did we have to put this Heathkit from hell back together as a display, we had to move all the stuff that was in there and find other places to put that. It was an incredible effort. So there it is, put together, not pretty, not even didn't have the floor. Basically, we ran out of time for the grand opening, which we wanted to do with the conference, and we did the best we could, and there it was. And there's the crew that did it, and the fat dude in the front, I guess, is me. Now you can still see there's a lot of stuff loose and around in the background. You can only move so much stuff in a hurry and still put all this thing back together. So there's the display today. And the man sitting at the desk there is the person who wired up all the lights and all the meters and all those things. That panel has an enormous amount of incandescent lights in it. Little bitty lights, flea lights, and all sorts of them. He was upside down and underneath them for months, putting those lights in, getting the meters to work. There's a better view of the exhibit today. Now, you may know that there's a multi-generational issue here. The original station would have controls more in the line of the area here on the left. But in addition to it, there's some more modern equipment. And in here that you can't see, and I'll show you that in a minute, really modern. There are the tubes, the 4CV 100,000 tubes. They're not water cooled, they're vapor cooled. There's a better view of the audio side of the process. And the station was in operation from 1944 to 2007. So there was some pieces that obviously were replaced over time. One of the unique features of the A21A is it has this board. And on the board, you can make some adjustments to the circuits, and the meters above it give you an idea of what's happening on the circuit. It's a way of troubleshooting the transmitter while it's on the air. That's the transmitter itself. There's a lot of stuff that's in the back. But for a 250,000 watt carrier, probably modulated turning into 1,000,000 watts, it's relatively simple. One of the features of the A21A is it has a mobile unit, a remote unit and they can change the frequency there off the remote, and they can change the power levels and things like that. Here's the audio when I said before that the audio is available to anybody that wanted to plug into it. This is the audio two consoles, and you can see that the plugs in the bottom, all right. The rule is you can't do that. You can't initiate anything but the station, but someone takes it over. It's pretty easy to plug in and do whatever you want to do with it. And then there's a display of Voice of America information, and it's Kissing Cousins, Radio Free Europe, and some of the other cousins of it. The device that's sitting on the floor is the low filter, and you can see there's the size of the coax. That's what, 10 inches across, Lynn? Something in that range.
8 inches across, and the center conductor is half-line copper water pipe.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, half inch.
Yep, thank you. But the kids like it. They like to play with it. And we make a point of freedom not being freedom. She was having a ball, and those meters in there are dancing with the music.
We should add that the big blank space in that console had a computer in it when we got it, and we took the computer completely out of there. And someday maybe we'll get some more panels so we can make it look like the rest.
Yeah, don't forget it was multi-generational, but that computer was in DOS. Anyway, let's talk about the 821A transmitters. And there were 6 or 9 of them that were built by Collins to supply them. As I said, they're 250,000 watts unmodulated. They ran them at about 175,000 because the tubes were very expensive, and that difference in power output was enough to give them a lot of extra time on the. It's interesting to see a tube that weighs 97 pounds with a little note on the top in pencil that it's soft. I was that chuckle the tube is soft. Anyway, it was capable of basically 4 megahertz to 26.5. The most significant piece, if you change the frequency, it would auto-tune in 20 seconds or less. Now, the original design by Collins used Jennings variable caps and a very complex mechanical drivetrain to do that. But the transients are phenomenal, and the variable caps didn't like it that much. So ultimately, they had to replace all the caps several times, and then ultimately they had to replace them with water-cooled caps to deal with the transients and to deal with the heat that it was creating. And it's a very stable frequency process. As I said before, it's 475 kW in at 4160s. And the output, the curtain arrays are 300 ohms balanced. So if you had 800 acres of land and you had all your antennas on it, yours would be just like Voice of America. So this always reminds me a little of my house, very little, but that's the way it looked at when it was before they took them all down. So that's Voice of America. It's prominently displayed in the museum, and we're proud to have it. It's one of the 3. Dixon is in private hands, and Bethany is in public hands in a museum. But Bethany is by Dayton, Ohio, and then there's ours. And at that point, everything else is gone.